Okay, guys, I'm going to attempt to have a nuanced conversation with you about the Eyes of Texas, but I need to tell you right up front, I am exhausted on this subject because I feel that I am just repeating myself, and the more I try to have this conversation out in public, the less nuanced it seems to be. But on the other hand, if we don't have this conversation out in public, what are we actually going to accomplish? So knowing that nobody's mind is going to be changed on this, let's start with the report that was filed by the University of Texas, 58 pages that, among other things, claim that there's no racist intent in the Eyes of Texas, which I got to tell you feels like a slight and a lie, because the song is based on I've been working on the railroad and was ordained by a Confederate general who quite literally fought to enslave people like me. You can't start a conversation about what is racist and what is not unless you are willing to admit that fact. And there's still people that will jump into these comments and try to tell me that people like me, black folks, were not the issue, that it was states' rights. The rights of the state to enslave me. And then there's this aspect of when the song became the song, 1903, minstrel shows, and you can go read the report. I'm not here to litigate the report. University of Texas said they're going to keep their song, and I think they could have stopped it there. They didn't actually have to write another 57 pages plus 9 paragraphs to get there, because they're not going to budge on this issue. But it also bears mentioning that the University of Texas has not been at the forefront of being progressive when it comes to race. 1970, Julius Whittier becomes the first black player to letter in football at the University of Texas. That happened at the University of Michigan in the 19th century, 1890s. Same thing with Ohio State for perspective there. We can have conversations about segregation and integration, but we also have written down by the University of Texas documenting we don't want to have black athletes, and they did not change that tune, no pun intended, until 1963, okay? And then you're talking about really not actually having a player that was a varsity winner until the 70s. And then we get Roosevelt leaks, and then we get Earl Campbell, but we don't get a black quarterback until the 90s, and then there's Vince Young, and I get it. But the problem that I think we're going to have in all of this is that there are folks that aren't willing to admit that the song is offensive to most black folks. Not all black folks, but most black folks. We're also not going to have a conversation about whose song it is. You can't reappropriate a song, right? And I don't know why anybody would want to appropriate something that was sung at a time when they were subjugated, right? It just doesn't go with my personal constitution. Now, in as far as the compromise that they're calling it, I don't know that it is one compromise, but we'll get to that just a second. They're saying that, or Jay Hartzell's saying, president of the University of Texas, that players will not be made to stand or even be on the field and sing along with the Eyes of Texas as it is being played following games, particularly at University of Texas football games. I don't know how that works actually, because if you keep seeing a number of black players leave the field and a number of white players stay on the field while you play the Eyes of Texas, that is not going to be the kind of look you want to achieve, okay? It's just not. It's also going to invite other folks to have opinions about who was on the field and who wasn't, just like we had opinions about Sam Ehlinger and a couple other teammates being on the field following the quadruple overtime loss to Oklahoma, and we had this conversation again. We've since had Steve Sarkisian show up and say, we're going to sing that song proudly, and I'm going, yo, man, I know some dudes on that team that just ain't going to do that. And they don't feel represented here. They also feel shouted down and told that their feelings don't matter. And then they want to have this conversation about where you go to school. And if you don't like it, go somewhere else. That doesn't help either. The whole idea here is to be more inclusive, to which, yes, if it offends you, you should be allowed to voice that opinion, and that opinion should be considered. But that's getting it also into a conversation about whether or not you actually want to make this work. Because there are folks that are claiming that this is not a race issue, when that's all it seems to be, is a race issue. And until we get into a space where we can admit that fact, because we've got the University of Texas making this thing, claiming that this is the factual document around the eyes of Texas and its origin, we have to actually admit the fact that Robert E. Lee of Washington and Lee was the general for the Confederacy, which again fought to enslave black folks. Why are we honoring that?